but how do we get out of this, Andre? How do we engage men? How can we help men without um without making them feel as a victim? Because I think that's at the core of it. Men don't like to feel like victims, but if they are, how do we get them to actually connect?
Yeah, I think there's two parts to that I just want to comment on. I think you're right about the victimhood. When I think back, I bounced back quite quickly when I came out of the relationship. I met my lovely wife now, but the things that attracted her to me, I'd like to think it was my good looks and my body, but she tells me actually it wasn't. It was my sense of humour and positivity. And so had I been this miserable victim caught up in all the woes of what had happened before, would I be with her today? Probably not. And so I don't think victimhood serves men very well at all. Did I come out of it instinctively to repair so I could find someone else? Probably not. But it was definitely an inbuilt thing that I needed to recover fast, and I wanted to do so. I had a bit of counselling. I did take a bit of time. But yeah, I think your observation on victimhood is spot on. How do we get out of it? You know, sometimes it's the really simple things. This wasn't my idea. I stole it from someone else who works. He does a lot of mental health stuff for men, particularly around suicide. And suicide, when I say it bothers me, obviously it bothers me, but also with 3 boys under 7 and the stats around boys, I'm very conscious now of suicide. He said that he did this thing with his kids, and I was like, that's amazing. I'm going to do that with my boys, who are my oldest boys are 7 and 4. And they absolutely love it. They look forward to it now. And it's literally, when they go to bed, every night now, after a story, I ask them, share with me something that made you happy today. They do so. We chat about it for like 30 seconds. We don't go into it in huge detail. And share with me something that made you feel sad or unhappy today. That's it. And they look forward to that. But every day, they now share something that made them happy, something that made them sad. And so I think trying to get men from a very early age, just to get used to just talking, not just about the good stuff, not just about football and beer. I mean, I could talk about football all day long. Don't even get me started. But getting them used to talking about positive and negative feelings is just part of what they do. I think is a step forward, and I think it's a great idea. It's so simple. It's not even mine. I wish it was, but I'd probably market it in some way. But you know, that kind of talking with particularly on boys and getting them to talk, you know, like relationships, boundaries, all that stuff, getting that in early, I think is a step forward. And I do think as much.
But would you say that to do that effectively, boys need a father or a male figure?
I don't know, actually. I don't think there's any reason. I tend to do it because it's just my thing that I do with them. But no, I don't think so. I think if a single mum could do it, or not a single mum, a woman could do it. You know, if I'm away for a week, my wife could do it just as effective. They'd probably like the variety, in truth. So I think anyone can do it, but getting boys used to talking normally, like it's no big deal, like it's just a normal thing, is helpful. I do love one of the guys who I love his work, Robert Wells. He's on Twitter. A lot of his stuff, he really does call it out on a lot of the narrative that we use and the language that we use, not in a really pedantic way, but in a really balanced way. So I do think some of our language, you know, the example I mentioned about encouraging girls to aim high and boys to respect girls, I mean, that's got to change. We've got to be more balanced in our language, and it's up to people like you and me to call it out. But you mentioned like you in the bookshop. It's a great story. And the way you told that story to us, it's clear that you were very polite, you were very balanced, you weren't all angry man about it. And I think the more we can calmly and insightfully call this stuff out, the more we will get people on side and the more we will make progress.
I'm slightly worried when you told me the story about the one good thing and one bad thing. That sounds absolutely amazing, and once I have children, I will definitely do that with them. But what bothers me is that we constantly hear, oh, boys have to talk more about their feelings. To me, it feels very oppressive, kind of like, it sounds like be more like girls. And I think we have to define a new way for boys to talk about their feelings that works well for boys.
Yeah.
And I organizations like the Boy Scouts, for example, or boy only spaces where they can just talk about their experiences of being boys are very important. The same for girls. I think girls need some safe spaces where they can talk about their experiences as girls. And I think in regards to mental health for men and for boys, I keep saying maybe we should change the language from saying therapy to maintenance and just say, hey, you look after your car, not because your car is broken, but because you want your car to work well. It's the same with your mental health and with your health. You don't do it because you're weak, but because you want to stay strong. So changing the attitude and taking the stigma away from actually looking after yourself.
I think
I think it's fascinating, Andrew, that you said, you know, your new wife is or was attracted to you primarily because of your humor and your good-naturedness. And I had a theory I was talking about on Twitter where women are primarily more attracted to humor than men are in a partner. And I believe that this is why men are primarily more funny in general than women are. If men thought that funny women were the sexiest thing in the world, women would be absolutely hilarious.
Yeah.
And I hypothesized that one of the reasons that women would be attracted to a funny man is because a man with a sense of humor is someone who doesn't take themselves too seriously, someone who could keep a cool head in a crisis, and B, also someone who is able to process emotions quite healthily. You know, so I think part of the reason that men sort of leaned towards being funny more often than women is not simply because women find it attractive, although obviously that is a major contributor. I also think that men needed a way of dealing with the grotesque things they were going to see throughout history. They were going to see their friends get mauled by tigers or stabbed through the throat or, you know, blown apart by a grenade, and they needed a way to emotionally combat that. And so they developed humor. And I think women learned to see funny men as men who were able to deal with a crisis in a calm and collected way.
I think that's a very good point. I think humor might be man's version of social intelligence or a measurement of social intelligence. And because women are slightly different, they are more communicative and they are more caring for each other. And I think banter might be the male version of that. Huh, that's interesting.
Yeah, interesting observation. Definitely.
So before we come to an end, please tell us, what do you want to see in the future? How do you think we in the men's movement, how can we highlight domestic abuse better? How can we make a difference? Is there hope?
Yeah, there's definitely hope. I think I've referred to it a few times. I'm conscious of that, but more broadly speaking, the mental health talk that has exploded as a field, and that's really great. You know, whether it's suicide, domestic abuse, whether it's supporting men or women, I think there is a movement towards people talking, and not in a forced way. You see some of these groups popping up. It's men going for a walk, it's men doing this, it's men doing that, and so I think there is hope. And I think the more that men get used to talking, then the more it raises the profile of domestic abuse as well, and then more people will say, actually, that's happened to me. Is this normal? Is this normal? That kind of a thing. Whereas before, a man just wouldn't have talked about it. And I think it's changing. I feel very positive and hopeful for the whole space of men's mental health. I do think it will take time. I do think, you look at the work of the women's groups that have the funding to throw at keeping things as they like it. But I think, like I say, I'm repeating myself here, but I've been astonished by how many women have contacted me since my TEDx talk come out saying it happened to their brother's son. And, those women will not be ignored, because if it's happened to their son, they will not be silenced and they will be advocates. And so I see a real movement starting. I'm really hopeful.
Okay. How do we get into the government, so to speak? Because in the debates around the domestic abuse bill, for example, male victims were mentioned by the scrutiny committee 4 times. Twice of that was actually in a negative way, and women were mentioned 400 times. And you could tell that there was I have no problem with calling it a mafia. I think there are strong lobby groups that try to keep the narrative the way it is. I think the overall society, when you talk people on the street, they are very level-headed, and they are like, oh, of course male victims should get recognition and support. But yes.
It's starting. Listen, 10 years ago, if that domestic abuse bill was being discussed 10 years ago, men wouldn't have even had a mention. So for me, it's starting. You're seeing the occasional articles in the press. And obviously it's difficult because national press won't publish a story unless there is a secured conviction, and men are less likely to secure conviction. So you're never going to hear that many stories of male victims of domestic abuse in the press. But it is starting. We are seeing stories when there are programs on domestic abuse. And Panorama did one. Men as victims, a half an hour program got 1 or 2 mentions. But hey, 10 years ago, they wouldn't have got a mention. And so for me, I think progress is slow, but it's starting. And I wonder whether what we'll see, and this is speculation, maybe Eccentrik can comment on this, but we'll see a sort of a movement from the ground upwards, because there's plenty of people working on the ground for women's aid who are very passionate about male victims of domestic abuse. It's just the people at the top in the corporate circles that would want to shut that down. But eventually, what's taking place on the ground will work its way up, is my view.
Matt?
Yeah, I've always believed that this would be a grassroots movement, that we would have to rely on ourselves. We couldn't rely on politicians. I mean, 52% of the voters are women, and gynocentrism is everywhere. We're bred gynocentric. So it makes far more sense for politicians and people who want to be re-elected to appeal to that, to constantly reinforce women and that how much they're doing for women and how much they care about women. It's risky business to talk about men. So relying on a politician to take those risks is just never going to work. We're going to be sorely disappointed time after time. We do need to rely on ourselves, and I do think that we're doing a fantastic job. So many of us are just random people from different corners of the world who have all come together and been self-taught. We've taught ourselves to become researchers. We've taught ourselves to become journalists. We've taught ourselves to become presenters and media spokespeople. It's wonderful to see that for a movement that does need to rely on itself, people seem to be ready for that. People seem to be up to the challenge.
Yeah.
I hate to be the party pooper, but unfortunately the system in place is incredibly, I would call it evil and very smart. So when you look at training for teachers, for example, it's gendered. You look at training for nurses, it's gendered. You look at training for the police, it's gendered, because it all comes from Women's Aid and Save Lives. So they make sure that through their training and through the research that they provide, all the people that could get in contact with victims only recognize female victims and overlook male victims. By doing so, the statistics will always stay the same, that they overlook male victims and they focus on the female victims. And because there are more female victims in the statistics, the laws focus on women. So I think they really created a wonderful system where it's almost impossible for us to get our foot in. And the suicide rates for men are 75%. You would think that that is difficult to ignore, but it's being almost completely ignored. It's there. But if it was the other way around, if women were 75% of the suicide rates, there would be, rightfully so, a movement going through the whole country that this needs to change.
Yeah,
I agree. It needs to be a grassroots movement, but I don't think that we can get through this wonderfully constructed wall. So my hope is that somebody on the top says, wait a second, I thought we want equality.
yeah.
So my biggest hope is to say, do we want equality or do we not want equality? So we should support women in the areas where women are not doing as well, but we need to support men in areas where they are not doing it well. Yeah.
Okay, can I just ask?
I didn't want to end on a depressing note.
Can I just ask that we wrap things up there and we give our closing statements?
Absolutely.
I'll go last. Andrew, would you like to impart any final messages and tell people to look up any of your work?
Oh, bless you. Well, listen, if anybody wants to see my TEDx talk, it's there on YouTube. And listen, if you do watch it, please give it a thumbs up because that just helps with the algorithms. If you look for Andrew Payne, Leamington Spa TEDx on YouTube, you'll find it. The absolute wrap-up message from me is just to encourage any man who you just know in your deep down that things aren't right in the relationship, things are really, really, really hard, and you feel like you're being bullied, then just reach out if you can to someone outside that relationship, just to bounce off what's going on for you. Just you don't suffer alone, and that's would be my final statement to yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Andrew, thank you so much for being on our show. I'm pretty sure it won't be the last time, and I'm very, very much looking forward to hear about your experiences with the new project. I hope that's going to go really well. I would also like to highlight a Facebook group that has recently started called It Happens to Men, which is also a domestic abuse group started by a friend of ours. His last name is Mackey, and he wrote a book, It Happens to Men. So we just started that domestic abuse group. So everybody who's listening to this who wants to join is very welcome to do so. And yeah, thank you so much for being in this chat. Domestic abuse is something that is very, very close to my heart because I hate injustice, and I just feel like men don't get justice and don't get support at the moment. So thank you very much for working in that field.
Yes, I too would like to thank you, Andrew, for coming on. It was a real privilege to talk to you and learn more about your work and get a different perspective from what we usually hear, not just socially, but even within these circles. You're obviously far more knowledgeable about these particular issues than many of us. So it's a wonderful learning experience. I know that Elizabeth would love to have been here and love to have told you herself what amazing work you do. So on her behalf, I would also like to say thank you, because I know that she is a big fan. And yes, for anybody out there who is suffering from these issues, please do feel free to come forward to talk about it, to look for help, to look for people to listen, because we are here. You don't have to be silent. As Andrew said, change is happening. It's happening slowly, but it is happening. So I will link the resources, including Andrew's TEDx video, in the description for anybody who's looking for these kinds of things. And we hope that you will find solace in that if you are struggling yourself. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much, guys, for being here. Please like, subscribe, and comment, and share where you can. We'll see you all again next week. Bye.
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 Bye.